I could recall this. In the last class, we were doing with descent types. I'll tell you what we'll be doing in today's class. There are two topics. One we should be completing is some bit of conclusion on descent. Once we do this, I take you to tribals. We would start with some brief idea about the demography. I remember to have given some definitions of tribes and finally concluding on Ghurier's definition, etc. Then we will have a glimpse of, though I had given a list of provisions when we were dealing with scheduled castes long time back, constitutional provisions. This will be for a short question. This does not include things like 5th and 6th schedule. That will come later. And we will introduce the idea of approaches to tribal. See, we have been speaking of this many times in the class, assimilation, isolation, etc. For this, we will take a proper note. Then we would start the discussion with the tribal problems. Maybe perhaps the first one we would begin with is tribal illiteracy and lack of education. And I don't know, based on the availability of patience and time, we may get into the topic of tribal health. That is the scheme of the things. And this will continue with the next set of aspects, such as, if at all that I am not able to do in today's class comprehensively, because there are specific regions which I want to do here, that is Central Indian tribes and the health issues, East Indian tribes. So if at all such kind of specific region-wise questions are asked, we should be able to write. So, and then I would want to start with something like forest policy. That will take a good amount of time, and something related to that is land alienation, poverty, indebtedness. These three come together. So this would be the next set of things. Sir, in the last class we were talking about various descents. Patrilineal, matrilineal descent we have drawn, bilineal or double descent also. Can you go back and see the pictures? Bilineal, double descent, and then you have ambilineal descent, and then parallel descent. You try to scribble a few examples there. Keep writing. At bilineal descent, individual traces descent equally from both the parents, and generally a couple establishes neolocal residence away from both sets of parents, away from both sets of parents. Inheritance is allocated equally between the siblings, irrespective of gender. Irrespective of gender. Keep writing there. According to Skupin, such a practice is mostly found in foraging communities and industrial societies. Those are some popular examples. Yako, that is a tribe in Nigeria, studied by that man, Daryl Forde. Vendas of South Africa. Vendas of South Africa. We have come across earlier Vedas. Herero of Western Africa. Herero of Western Africa. Keep writing there. Among Herero, there is a clear distinction. There is a clear distinction of the aspects inherited from maternal and paternal lines. For example, economic aspects are inherited patrilineally. And ritual aspects through maternal line. Take another example. Ashanti of Ghana. Within the ritual aspect as well, the inheritance rights are distributed. For example, the religious chantings classified as Natoro are inherited patrilineally. And those categorized as rions, which include puberty rituals, are inherited matrilineally. Go to the next one, that is ambilineal descent. Ambilineal. It exhibits a flexibility and occasionally confusion regarding lines of descent. An individual is free to decide inheritance line, due to which across generations one can observe lineages changing from matri to patri, or vice versa. In such societies, similar to bilineal descent, gender parity is observed compared to unilineal descent. Take some of the examples. Samoans, Kwakithal, and that is a general observation that we find in traditional Hindu society. In the absence of the male child, the female becomes a legal heir, and she would take the responsibilities of a male child. Go to parallel descent. The rarest form of descent, where female traces her descent through maternal line, and male through paternal line. On the face of it, it looks to be simple and lacks confusion, and may symbolize equal treatment of the genders. Nevertheless, in practice, a clear hierarchy exists in the more functional and useful aspects in the economic plane. Nevertheless, in practice, a clear hierarchy exists in the more functional and useful aspects in the economic plane, being inherited patrilineally. And the less significant aspects inherited through maternal line. Those are the two popular examples. The Spanish tribe of Saha and the Masas of Arunachal. So, sir, if the question is dissent is a culture rule, for a question such as dissent is a culture rule comment, you define dissent and you say that similar to things like, culture, definition of culture, or institution of marriage, institution of family, etc. Dissent also is variously seen across the societies. So these are the popular varieties that are found: matrilineal, patrilineal, and bilineal descent, and then ambilineal descent. You have parallel descent, and you explain, you give an example there and say that, see, there are so many varieties, and hence you can say that descent is a culture specific thing. That's your answer. No need of arguments and things like that. Let me take you somewhere else. For topics such as kinship terminologies, can you tell me 2 or 3 popular people who must have dealt with the topic in our subject? Morgan was there. Morgan was trying to give us evolution from. Kya hua? Descriptive to classificatory. Okay. And Iroquois. So Iroquois study was by Morgan. And Bowes, what did he do? In Eskimos, was he calling it kinship terminology or using kinship terminology as a tool? He was doing something else. Any particular technique that I must have mentioned there? I repeat my question. My first question was, who are all the thinkers in our class we have come across who must have dealt with kinship terminologies? One, you said Iroquois, that particular person. The second one you are saying is Bowes. If Bowes was using kinship terminology, he was not simply trying to list out the terms. These are the terms that are used by different people to call. But he was using kinship terminology as a tool within some other technique. Can you read out the techniques from chapter 8? Fieldwork techniques from chapter 8. And from those techniques, can you identify one where there is a possibility of using kinship terminologies as a tool? Genealogies. Genealogical method. In genealogical method, what happens? And in genealogical method, what happens? You are actually trying to go back several generations and see how the current generation understands them. Is it that you still keep a record of your Esther generations, long time back ancestors, their names and the communities from where they must have come into here? Suppose it is a patrilineal, patrilocal society, where from you are getting the female into your family, and what could be the geographical region where you are actually staying, and what are the various kinship terms that you are using. It is not simply that from the kinship terms, from the genealogies, you are trying to suggest which is the group that is an incestuous group, which is not an incestuous. So all these are actually, and so Bowes was doing that in Eskimo. If you could recall one of the videos that we were seeing, so when Bowes had gone, he had prepared one field note of so many thousands of people, and he tries to see, he tries to make a note of 5 or 6 generations from where they were able to recall the details. And then after so many years, another fellow whose documentary we were actually watching, he goes back and tries to meet the same people and then their predecessors, their successors, and see to what extent they are actually taking that knowledge of their ancestors to the next generations. All this was going on. So this is a more functional thing that we observe. Yourself trying to link yourself with your ancestors and carrying that knowledge to the next generations. Now, even if that is not having such a major economic significance, it actually is a wealth of knowledge that you are transferring to the next generations. We are not actually commenting on the economics there. But then, because you are able to trace back the relation, the lifestyle of those people, you would be in a position to know which are the regions that were actually in connection with each other. When you know that these two regions are in connection with each other, this is actually an attempt, this would simplify the attempt to know cultural diffusion also. So it would be easy for us, maybe language spread, maybe material spread, or maybe the trade relations that were established between them. So it is not simply the kinship term or genealogy that is being observed there. It goes a long way in knowing several other things, linking themselves with the past generation. This was what was happening with the Boers. Can you remember somebody else who had done almost a similar work? Margaret Mead. Anybody else before? Rivers was there. Rivers was doing this at several places in Australian region, and he was also doing that in Todas. But there was somebody else who criticized, who didn't find it useful to do the kinship terms. So for him it is of no use. Everything said and done, I think he was an economics man. If anything, said something? If anything had to be useful, in quotes, if anything has to be useful, that must have maybe some kind of subsistence utility. And the way he frames that sentence, for him, kinship terms are nothing more than an algebra, unless otherwise that particular x is of some functional utility to you. For him, kinship terms are nothing but some kind of algebraic letters which do not actually matter unless otherwise they are of some kind of a functional utility. How does it matter in a South Indian Hindu society? How does it matter if you are calling your cross cousin by some XYZ name unless otherwise she is available for you for marriage? When she is not available for marriage, it doesn't matter if you are calling her a sibling or if you are calling her a cross cousin. Are you following what I'm saying? This is what we have seen in the earlier cases. Now, the question in the exam can be kinship terminology systems. Kinship terminology systems, that's what? Any question? Kinship terminology systems, that is the topic. What it means is, see, somehow this has been a fashion in the discipline. Whichever topic you pick up, you try to define, and then when you are seeing that, okay, I'm not coming to a logical conclusion, I'm not able to have something like a universal definition or so, I would quickly say that, see, there is so much of diversity. This is because of culture. Different cultures are having different ways. This is a common thing that we are having. If at all a student doesn't remember or did not prepare on different kinship terminology systems, he would quickly write that and feel happy. But remember, this will be for a big question. Kinship terminology systems is for a big question, not less than a 20 marks. So basically your answer will start by defining what a kinship term is. I'm not dictating this answer, I am telling you the structure, and I will discuss the kinship terminology systems. So you will frame your introduction, and then you will write about those 6-7 various systems along with the pictures, and then you would write whatever you feel there. Kinship terms are nothing but the terms that you use to address the kinsman. Having defined that, you will tell who were the various thinkers that prominently had dealt with kinship terminologies, who gave importance to kinship terminology. You already said that, like, Morgan is there, or Bowers is there, Malinowski is there, Mead is there, or somebody else is there. Then in the contemporary anthropology, after so much of research, so many societies being studied, anthropologists tried to categorize kinship terminologies into 6 or 7 major systems. See, having accepted that there is a cultural diversity in the terms that we are using for the same kinsman, there's a cultural diversity in the terms that we are using to address the same kinsman. So it's as simple as, what is the term that you might be using for your maternal uncle, and what somebody else is using to address him. So I'm not talking about the language-wise difference. I'm talking about whether the term is unique to him, or the term that you have used for that maternal uncle is used for some other kinsman. Are you following what I'm saying? We are not looking here for the language differences. So for example, I am calling my maternal uncle Mama. Am I using the same word somewhere else also? That's what I'm looking at. That is the reason why in this question we use numbers or maybe some kind of shading. Shadings also I discourage, because in the frenzy of the exam, sometimes you may tend to make mistakes, and it is time consuming also. Numbers you can quickly do and escape. After having said this, see, these are the 4 or 5 people that have dealt with kinship terminologies. Anthropologists contemporarily have tried to categorize kinship terminologies into popular 6 or 7 varieties based on broader similarities that we find. We don't say that every society that we are placing under that particular system is 100% true to the same. It's not that way. Majority of the terms may look to be similar there. See, currently in the discipline, irrespective of the fact that so many schools have come and gone by after functionalism, even today, functionalism is a very dominant school in anthropology. See, we have seen questions like, especially when you go to the interview, questions like, which is the anthropological school of thought that you are highly impressed with? Or which do you think is the anthropological school of thought that is more useful today, that is mostly followed today? Sometimes, questions are like, who is your favorite hero, favorite, anthropological thinker? And you will have to explain why and how, kind of things. These are the very common kind of questions. Though an anthropologist is there on the board, or not even if a sociologist is there, he'd be able to answer such kind of questions, because more or less you find larger similarities in the thinkers. Now here you will have to talk about the functionality of the kinship terms and what is the basic categorization that we give. See, the basic categorization we have given earlier is kinship terms can be classificatory or descriptive. And such kind of categorization had begun with Morgan himself. Kinship terms are classificatory and descriptive. Classificatory meaning bunching of the kins. That's how we define classificatory terms. Classificatory terms are those where several kinsmen are bunched together and addressed with the same term. And this particular bunching has its own significance. I repeat, sir. We are trying to give you a scheme for the question, kinship terminology systems, a big question. See, before I actually start talking about this, if at all some of you had studied this particular topic earlier, you might be wondering that how can one write a 20 marker on this particular topic. But a stage will come where you will have to cut short a lot of information, because you find a paucity of space there. So what happens is you are trying to categorize this classificatory terms and descriptive terms. The categorization for the first time was given by Morgan. Classificatory terms are those where several individuals, several kinsmen are bunched together, whereas in the descriptive terminology, each individual or the individuals there are having explanatory and descriptive terms. Going back to the classificatory term, when you are bunching several people into the same term, the bunching might indicate respect towards that kinsman or disrespect towards that kinsman. It may indicate respect or disrespect towards that individual, importance or unimportance that you give to them. That's how Morgan writes. Importance or unimportance given to the individual can be understood by the kinship term, that is classificatory kinship term. In the descriptive term, your role, your status in the society can be easily understood because the term is unique to you. The term cannot be used for somebody else. Popular perception was there, especially in Morgan, when he was saying that in the stream of evolution, classificatory terms must have given rise to descriptive terms. At that time, we have seen the criticisms. If you could recall early classes of us, we see that in the contemporary societies across the world, with kinship losing its significance, many times you don't know how a kinsman is related to you. So you try to bunch them together into some groups. So if a gray-haired person is there, you would bunch him with your grandfather's generation. Or maybe, a senior person, an aged fellow is there, of the age of your father. Maybe you would bunch them into the paternal generation. Or suppose he belongs to your same generation, you would either bunch her or him into your own siblings, or maybe a possible mates there based on the attractiveness that you find in that individual, and nothing more than that. So you don't exactly know how the individuals are related. Keeping this in view, it is generally said that kinship terminologies, the way Morgan had said, giving rise to from classification to descriptive terms, it is not accepted by many people. They feel that descriptive may be the trait of the older societies, and contemporarily it may be a classificatory, basically because kinship is losing its significance. I hope you are following what I am saying, and I hope you are also scribbling. Katha vinnattuga vinnaranikondi, adi harikathe avutundi. Harikatha, you keep on listening to that again and again, you don't make a note. Having said this, we would try to look at some very significant terminology systems. Those are the very popular basic ones: Sudanese, Hawaiian, Eskimo, Iroquois, Crow Indians, and Omaha Indians. About each of them, I'll give you the rules. This exercise partially we had done earlier also. You remember in one of our classes, we tried to do this. You just take those names. I'll have to write. Anyway, I'll have to switch on the light. This looks to be a repetition because we had done this earlier also partially. We'll be using this standard picture for all the terminology systems. While you are specifying the importance of kinship terminologies, you also should indicate that the terms explain to us the possibility of finding a mate in that individual. Based on the term you are using, which is an incestuous group, which is the marriageable group, one can understand. Can we start with the first one? Sudanese system. So what we would do is, for each system, we would give the basic rules. You will finish drawing the picture. Sudanese system. Every individual kinsman has his or her unique kinship term. Unique kinship term. And there are no general categories or classificatory terms. Can you finish that? Every individual, that's the simple rule that is given in the Sudanese system. This is the most descriptive system among several kinship terminologies. Each individual has his or her specific kinship term. There is no duplication anywhere. For every single individual kinsman, there is a separate term. Meaning that if some other family is there, some other group of kinsmen, same kind of relatives are there, then you'll have the same terminology there. I'm not saying that if I'm using this term here for this man, it will not be used anywhere else. It's not that way. The same kind of relationships, for example, 12 and 16 are related. So 16 is 12's mothers, brothers, daughters. So one's mother's brother's daughter will have a special term. And you'll have to also understand here, based on the numbering there, for example, your maternal uncle might be having 7 daughters. You cannot have the same term for all of them. So based on the number also there will be a distinction. So the moment I'm using a particular term, you would know that I am talking about the 7th daughter of my 6th maternal uncle. So it has no confusion at all. Many times we struggle to explain. Actually, we do not know the sequence of the brothers and sisters of our own father and mother. And some of them do not even know how many are there from the same single grandfather and grandmother. Jeevan. Why? Yella. Yeah. No, because it is not, it is different, I am giving different names. Definitely different. Here you have the link is this is the father, this is the mother, who are the siblings. But 4 is not the wife of 2. The link is through 4. If I am removing 4, the link is not there. So suppose if you do that way, for 11, 16 will be mothers, brothers, daughter. For 9, my father's, brothers, wives, brothers. It is 1 degree more. The link between these two is the 3rd degree kinship. Here it is the 4th degree kinship. Your question may be valid if 4 had another husband and from that husband she had a couple of children. So for them it should be fine. Any other question? I was watching this movie yesterday, Ninnu Kori. It was there on the TV. So a confusion prevails there between the couples. So I liked it very much. It's a typical Khasa wedding. A typical Khasa wedding. I don't know whether you remember that or not. This happened, this happened, this happened, and then he saw her, he saw her. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now 1 gets with 4, 2 gets with 3, and there is an exchange here, 5, 6, 7, 8. So at one place 5 and 8 come together, at one place 6 and 7 come together. How many permutations and combinations are actually possible there? I was looking for this new mathematics textbooks that we give for our school children. Maybe we should start having these kind of examples. So the so-called family, the sanctity of family, maybe this is the new sanctity that we are having. And the funnier part is that this new nuclear family and a new nuclear family with old groups of children, they are so very close to each other. So I was actually seeing another possibility, but maybe the same kind of a system might emerge in the future with some additional children that are born here. I mean, each of the families might be having their own children again. One of the families already has a third fellow, and they will also have another fellow. And now once again, suppose they think that, okay, my old mate was better than the new one. What will you do with the new group of children? How will you part them with? No? Kind of. So, in the last class, I have given one statement. In the traditional anthropology, it is said that simple is becoming complex. But then I said that we see in the familial institutions, complex is becoming simple. We said in that class, complex is becoming simple because a joint family when it is becoming a nuclear family when it is becoming a single parent family. The number of relations by adding one single individual, that is actually reducing. So as long as it is one individual, there is no problem at all. 1 plus 1, it adds problems. And then 1 plus 2, so many other issues there. Now this is altogether different kind of complexity. So maybe if at all you could communicate to the examiner properly, don't write a film story there. If possibly you are able to accommodate, because also this is also a very interesting emerging trend. And I find it so very surprising that how is it possible that these two still have that kind of friendship intact. Then I suddenly feel that maybe we are old timers. If at all we are thinking on those lines, we should be much more broad-minded. Kind of. Sudanese is fine. Every individual's role, responsibility, social status is fixed. There is no confusion. So what is the duty of the eldest grandson and what is the duty of the youngest fellow? It is clear. And from every term that you are using, you can actually understand. But one problem that we find in this system is, it needs a further clarification in order to know who is your marriageable kinsman. It requires an additional explanation, because looking at the term we cannot know. Suppose I am using the same term that I use for my mother and father to somebody else. I am anyway eliminating them from that. I am putting them in the incestuous group. But that is not happening here. So identifying marriageable partners from the kinsman is difficult in the case of Sudanese society. Am I clear to you? Let us go to the second one in your system. Before that, you try writing some examples to Sudanese system. These are the popular examples given. Latin kinship terms, Turkish kin terms, and Morgan says Old English kin terms. Sorry, Bowers says Old English kin terms. So Bowers shows very clearly that the older terms were highly descriptive. So that challenges Morgan's idea that we moved from classificatory to Maybe Morgan's thought was that as we are evolving, we know clearly how to group each one of them, where we should use a descriptive term, where we should not use. Maybe arrival of the civilization, according to him, must have given an individual much more wisdom to see from where I can seek a mate, from where I should not, kind of an understanding. And this is actually our own analysis. And Morgan never said that, but in order to help him out. We'll go to the second system. The second system, let us go to Hawaiian system. Hawaiian system. Very simple one. Hawaiian system, write down. Hawaiian system. Individuals in a parental generation, that is the rule number one. Individuals in a parental generation are addressed by the same kinship term with gender difference. Secondly, within one's own generation, one's own siblings, parallel and cross cousins are called by the same term with a gender difference. It looks to be an extended family actually, because you are using the same nuclear family relations to the rest of them. Within one's own generation, one's siblings, parallel and cross cousins are called by the same term with a gender difference. In the parental generation, all of them are addressed by the same term with a gender difference. So what are all the things that you can conclude from that picture? Okay, giving equal importance to both the sides. And
again, you wouldn't know your marriage.
Or maybe you know it. Not in the case of Sudanese. In Sudanese society, you are not using the term that you use for your brother and sister to others. So you are actually not clear in that particular case whether I will be able to marry my parallel or cross cousin. Here what is happening? Entire group of cross and parallel cousins are having the same term as you are using for your siblings. It means that there is no possibility of marrying any cousin. So the entire group of parallel and cross cousins, they fall under the incestuous group. Without any formal kind of field study, one can guess that maybe perhaps there is a reciprocity based relationship in that whole group. It may also be possible that they may be living together. All the patry and matry related individuals might be living together. I mean, it is difficult to conclude though. Because when I'm saying this, for example, this whole group is living together, say. It may create a problem. Suppose I am trying to draw from his side. I am using him, his wife's sisters and brothers, his sister and brother. You cannot have the nuclear family simultaneously at two different places. Did you follow what I'm saying? ये ठीक है ना? Suppose hurriedly when I say that there's a possibility that all of them might be forming a big household. But suppose I am calling him A, B. Forget about all these people, whatever name I give to them. See. This picture was drawn keeping in view this particular nuclear family. Now I am changing the reference nuclear family. I am using this nuclear family. There is a possibility that she has a brother and sister. They too have some fellows there. And he already has C and B. The picture has changed. Now when I say that they live together, now these people may come and fight. How can you live with them? I mean, how can you live with them because my people are also there? Maybe you are making it a patry-centered thing, or her husband might have a problem. So, make a note there, I'll tell you. Hawaiian society, through terminologies, confirms that the incestuous group is much wider than the nuclear family, meaning one cannot marry apart from one's own siblings, all the parallel and cross cousins. Right, another point there. Unlike several other systems, unlike several other terminology systems, like Eskimo, one cannot confirm rules of residence from the terminology picture of Hawaiians. Is that clear? Unless we go and see Eskimo. I repeat. Unlike several other terminology systems like Eskimo, one cannot confirm rules of residence from terminology system of Hawaiians. Thirdly, the extended family, the extended familial relations indicate equal importance being given to one's own patrilateral and matrilateral uncles and aunts uncles and aunts. Let us go to the other one. Eskimo kinship system. Eskimo kinship system. I'll give the rules, then you can draw the picture. Individuals within the nuclear family. Individuals within the nuclear family have their own distinctive kinship term. Secondly, all the parallel and cross cousins, all the parallel and cross cousins have the same kinship term, without a gender distinction, Thirdly, a rest of the individuals in a parental generation, have the same kinship terms, with gender difference. Try. What is the first rule? Nuclear family, they have their own distinctive terms. One's own parallel cousins and cross cousins have the same kinship term without a gender difference. You're not really bothered if it is a female or a male, everybody is a cousin to you. Everyone is a cousin to you. And rest of the individuals in the parental generation have the same kinship term with a gender difference. So 6 here, 6 there, 7. Is that clear? We know very well that our own kinship terms we don't remember. How will we be benefited by knowing how an Eskimo is calling his parallel cousin? But then when cultures are coming in contact with one another, understanding the other cultures would be easier by knowing several things about them. This could be one of them. And especially when you are trying to write the common civil codes, common type of family laws that may be extended to the entire group of centralized and non-centralized political systems, because we see that several non-centralized ones are coming into the fold of the state societies. When this is happening, disturbances are bound to happen. Is it really possible to extend the same kind of rules to everybody? In such kind of cases, knowing the kinship terms would come handy. Is this okay, sir, for all of you? Any problem? This shows to be a highly me-centered group. It is said thus because we don't see these terms anywhere else. The importance that one is giving to the kins in the nuclear family, you don't see the same kind of importance anywhere else. Sir, when I'm using nuclear family, I use the word importance. I don't use the word unimportance. So if an outsider is having a similar term, it means that I am giving the same importance that I give to a nuclear family kinsman to the other fellow also. And see, when you are not even differentiating based on a gender, it shows the high level of unimportance you give to them. any cousin for that matter, is equally unimportant. So unimportant that maybe here, by the way he is using, so unimportant that there may not be a possibility of marriage with them. If at all, he is using a different set of terms for male and female, we could have said that, okay, there is a possibility of marriage. There might be a possibility of marriage, though the picture does not clearly communicate. You are not respecting even the gender of your cousins. So it shows that they are highly unimportant to you, equally unimportant to you. Is that okay? Don't look very somber. No? Try to be slightly energetic.
Same kinship comes with gender difference. So the father we have denoted as one. So his brother also should be denoted as one, right?
No, that is not said. Among the remaining people, it is not within the nuclear family. So first point I said was nuclear family has got distinct terms, all the cross and parallel cousins. So in the parental generation, if at all that is not clear, you may make an addition there. In the parental generation, other than one's own parents, rest of the relatives have got the same kinship term with a gender difference.
As the entire system is an incestuous group, therefore there must be reciprocity for females and males to get married.
Maybe I must have said in the context of, see, when the ambit of the nuclear family is expanding, so what we have seen in the Hawaiian society, we are having only two different sets of terms. Generation wise, two terms in the parental generation, and the filial generation, two other terms. So it shows that each and every individual is of equal importance to one in the nuclear family. So the possibility is that whatever kind of exchanges that are happening, one is there is an expansion of the ambit of the nuclear family. So within the nuclear family, your generalized reciprocity things would operate, and hence what happens when the group is expanding, it is not simply expanding in terms of the incestuous group. So now it is not simply the nuclear family that is the incestuous group. Parallel cousins, cross cousins also, and those uncles and aunts in the parental generation, uncles and aunts in the parental generation. So all these people, they form an incestuous group, and that forms a close group. Because that is a close group, there is more of the reciprocal relations that should happen. So it is the generalized reciprocity thing in there.
And other than 3 and 4, if there are other siblings, would they be named as something?
3 and 4,
like
3 and 4 only. Primarily 3 and 4 only. So basically, that kind of a distinction we see in the case of Sudanese. That kind of a distinction, I was telling you, based on the numbers also, the term should vary. That is not the that is not the case with the rest of the ones. For all practical purposes, he is my brother, she is my sister. So maybe I may say that eldest brother, number 2 brother, number 3 brother, kind of it. You mean she should kill him and come? Don't try to mix up things. See, Vaisa question, and I don't think the kind of sororate system you are mentioning, we haven't reported it from Eskimo. It's not reported in this. Even otherwise also, don't try to complicate things. Why unnecessarily you kill one and try to... That's how life gets complicated. We'll have to keep things simple. Own sister. If at all that is the case, from the terminology you can say it is not also. As you are saying, from the terminology, yes, 6 becomes your sister only. But once again, sir, the 6 is written from the perspective of this generation. 6 is written from the perspective of this generation. But suppose I am extending that to the parental generation. So the term that your son is using for your sister, the term that he is using for your wife's sister is one and the same. So there's an indirect not possibility of. Okay. Can I go to the other one? See, Eskimo is considered to be a highly me-centered society. If at all you could recall the early ethnographs that we were referring to, Kathleen Goff, Lorna Marshall. Lorna Marshall's study was very much useful there. When Lorna Marshall was saying that there is a geographical determinism of sharing, in what situations you share, in what situations you don't share. Only when you can preserve, you don't share. If you are able to preserve, so it's as simple as if there was the old currency which you cannot use, you share. If there's a new currency, you don't want to share. It's as simple as it is. And there she was comparing the Kung Bushmen with the Eskimos. That was the first comparison she gave. I think it was one of the first examples I mentioned about geographical determinism. So in the case of Kung Bushmen, because the climate was not really convenient for the storing of the food, you actually go in for sharing. Whereas in the case of Eskimos, the food automatically gets stored and hence you are not. That was her philosophy. And at the same time, she was comparing, if you could recall again, Lorna Marshall's comparison of Kung Bushmen and the Lanas. Both of them, Kung Bushmen and Lanas, are inhabitants of the same environment. But there was a difference. Lanas wouldn't share, Kung Bushmen share. And there she said that Lanas are technologically advanced. When they have developed the technology of storing the food, they stop at sharing. So this was all. So for her, geographical determinism, technological determinism. But later, when Bowers had gone to Eskimos, not simply the terminologies, the actual economics of the or ethnography of Eskimos was studied by Bowers. Then he made a point that these are not the people who do not share with the kinsmen. And if you could recall the video that we have seen, the shackles of civilization from Brown, from Bowers, it very clearly shows once you get a seal, how you are slicing and distributing to several people. That is the difference I said at the time. Difference between you personally going there and seeing the community and you trying to write a story from a distance. It's as simple as it is. These are, so you can say that marriage may not be possible. And the people who are neighbors to them, a lot of mainstream American society, if you observe, there are cousin marriages are not really welcome. And it is also seen that the similar kind of terms are used here, like uncles and aunts. You are bunching them, irrespective of from which side they are, whether they are from maternal side or they are from the paternal side. You use the word uncle. Can I go forth? We go to the other one. And sir, you remember this word? It's called collateral merging. Collateral merging meaning you are using the same kinship term for a kinsman on the paternal side and one from the maternal side. So suppose I am using number 6 for a paternal relative and number 6 for a maternal relative. From both the sides of parentage, I am trying to use the same term. We call it collateral merging. Maybe it may come handy sometimes to you. Those are the other examples that we have found. General English kin terms, Zu Honsi or Kung San. Interestingly, Lorna Marshall doesn't talk about the kinship terms. When Bowers had come and later the comparison was made with the kinship terms, So it shows very clearly geography is not determining your kin terms. If geography had to decide everything, it could have decided the kinship terms as well. But it is not deciding. That's where the other reasoning comes. What makes people use a particular kin term for a kinsman? This may be a question for you to ponder over. What makes people use a particular kin term to a set of people? Why is it that parallel cousins and your own brothers and sisters are having the same term in a South Indian Hindu mainstream society? Or why is it that all the parallel and cross cousins are having the same term that you are using for a brother and sister in several of the North Indian communities? Why? You understood my question? I am calling my paternal uncle with a particular name. Maybe I am using for my own father. In some other society here, that's not happening. She says maybe affinity. I feel more affectionate as it is with my own father, and hence I am using. Is it the only reason or something else? Maybe economic. My father spends for me, he also spends for me. So I give the equal importance to them. Maybe they are having the same bloodline. They belong to the same lineage. And my question once again, sir, what makes people decide about what should be the terms that I use for the kinsman?
Usually economic and marriageable relationship, property inheritance.
First of all, whom I should marry itself is not uniform. Whom I should marry itself is not a uniform rule. At some places I can marry my half-brother. At some places I can marry my parallel cousin. At some places I can marry my cross cousin. At some places maybe cross species also, I don't know. But you watched that movie, Animal? Don't watch. And basically these questions have no single line answers. Many times we can't conclude on why we do what we do. There's so many things that make us decide over something. If somebody asks you, why do you want to marry that girl alone? Many times there's no answer. Because from your perspective, she might be beautiful. From the rest of the community, she is not. So cultural diversity is responsible for several things, including choosing one particular kinship term for the kinsman. And most of the time, the terminologies come in the historical, in the evolutionary way. Sometimes they get changed with culture contact, like how today in our own society, the words uncles and aunts, they are so loosely used to an extent that even if the individual is not related to us, we use the word uncle and aunt for them. Maybe the sole criteria could be that he or she has a gray hair, or maybe he or she is married, because of which we call them uncles and aunts. There are a few of us in our class also. Why, sir? So the criteria changes, and the sanctity of the word uncle and aunt changes. The sanctity of the word bhaiya changes, because it's so very loosely used. Let me take you somewhere else. Hawaiian, uske baad kya tha? Iroquois. Did we list Iroquois there? Iroquois, if at all. Iroquois. Iroquois system, write the rules. Number one, one's own father and father's brother are called by the same kinship term. Secondly, one's own mother and mother's sister have the same term. Thirdly, one's own siblings and parallel cousins have the same term with a gender difference. Write the other rule. Cross cousins have the same term with a gender difference. And these rest of the people have their own terms. That rule I did not write. The rest of the kinsmen have their individual terms. So now this becomes an in-group. Becomes an incestuous group. And these are the potential mates for this group. It is found that Iroquois have a practice of cross-cousin marriages. There are no parallel cousin marriages. I made you do this in one of our previous classes, saying that this is typically similar to the South Indian mainstream Hindu society, where cross-cousin marriages are preferential marriages. Right, another popular example there for Iroquois, Yanomamo tribe. Yanomamo kinship terms. So there are two other systems, Omaha and Crow. I'll give you the rules of one. The rest of the rules you can write. We'll do with Omaha. We'll do with Omaha. Start the rules. Number one. One's own father and father's brother have the same kinship term. Don't make mistakes here, sir. Secondly, first rule should I? One's own father and father's brother have the same kinship term. Secondly, one's own mother, comma, mother's sister, comma, mother's brother's daughter have the same term. Meaning that in the statement itself it is communicating one cannot marry mother's brother's daughter. Thirdly, parallel cousins and one's own siblings have the same terms with a gender difference. Fourthly, one's mother's brother and mother's brother's son have the same term. A rest of the kinsmen have a distinctive separate term, have distinctive separate terms. What might look complicated to you may be simple for the others, and vice versa. So let us start with this. Father's brother have the same term. Mother's sister, mother's brother's daughter have the same term. One's mother's brother's son have the same term. है ना? Siblings, parallel cousins. The rest of the people have their distinctive terms. So definitely there cannot be a marriage with one's own matrilateral cross cousins. One cannot marry one's own matrilateral cross cousins. 3 and 2 cannot be married. There might be a possibility of 7 and 8, we cannot conclude. It is generally observed that in the societies of Northern America where patrilineal communities are there, among the Red Indians, patrilineal communities wherever they are existing, there is a tendency of this kind of terminology. When you are in a patrilineal group, you would want to be psychologically close to the matrilinear side or matrilateral side. That's what we were saying in the other class. If you are in a patrilineal society, you tend to be closer, more affectionate towards the matrilateral people because their patri stands for authority. And you don't want to be closely affectionate to the authority. You want things to be let loose. So it is a general observation that in patrilineal societies, such kind of a tendency is observed. Now, can you write about the Crow Indians? Crow Indians, this is a mirror image of Omaha. Crow Indian system is a mirror image of Omaha. You try writing the rules. We'll start with the first rule there. Mother and mother's sister have the same term. What was the second rule? One's own mother, mother's sister, mother's brother's daughter. So you change the lateral side there. Father, father's brother, father's sister's son have the same term. Are you following when I say mirror image? What's the third rule? That there should not be a problem. One's own siblings, parallel cousins, have the same kinship term. There will not be an alteration on that. Arvate? ఏమి చెప్పితివి okay so it should be like a father's sister and father's sister's son father's sisters okay father's sister's daughter have the same term. Somebody is feeling sleepy, shake your head. The rest of the people have their own kinship terms. Once again, sir. You can scribble in between there. The two.
Can we say that Crow Indians are matrilineal society?
Yes, they are. Those are the other societies where Omaha was found. Igbo and Dani. Igbo in Mesoamerica. Study of kinship terminologies also indicates cultural change and evolution. I hope you must have referred to that document that I shared with you some time back, importance of kinship, reducing importance of kinship. Did you? I had placed that in the Dropbox before we went on a brief leave. Are you downloading things and keeping them with you? मैंने आपसे ये शेयर नहीं किया शायद पता नहीं शेयर किया था I don't know. After I have actually removed some of the things, people have once again requested me to place, but there was one very long mail saying that I'm looting you by by placing so many things in the Dropbox, an additional financial burden. I'm very sorry for that burden that I have given to you. In the best of your interest, I thought I would share certain things. Kabhi kabhi na, I don't understand things in my limited capacity. And I wanted to thank that individual who sent me that very long, lovely mail for giving me that gyan. So rest of the people, sir, as and when I am uploading things, you kindly preserve them with you. And I don't think you are at a stage where you can say that this is a useless thing. I don't think you are at a stage where you can say that something that is being given to you is useless, unless otherwise you had written the exams 7-8 times and then you got a gyan that, okay, this is one other example that you should be writing, Crow Indians. So those are the mails that we savor across our lunches at home. So you can give a brief conclusion there, saying that, see, kinship terminology system was one of the earliest interesting aspect in cultural studies of anthropology. But then you see, one person called Needham, we have come across him in our classes, who categorized types of marriage, if you recall, there were certain rules and regulations that we have got from him, preferential, proscriptive, that kind of a categorization we have seen from Needham in the last class, I think we have discussed. Needham was one of the earliest fellows who criticized the anthropological attempt to study kinship terms. See, it's something like this. In the article that I shared with you, Reducing Importance of Kinship, that article was written, that summary was given to you, keeping in view that, see, with monetization and with technological economic advancements across the societies, in general, kinsmen seem to be losing their importance. So it is actually written from the emic perspective. Being an emic, suppose I am a member within the group, for me, I see that the importance of my kin group is coming down. Somebody else is picking up that importance. See, alternatives have been emerging in the social life. Alternatives for every social institution have been emerging. Name it a marriage as an institution, family, or a kinship. For every social institution, alternatives are emerging. There is no exception for that. So that article was actually written keeping in view that tendency that every culture group in general has been experiencing this once it is getting exposed to the so-called individualistic modern societies. That was the summary of that. Now I am presenting you something else here which is not given in that article. You can use this discussion to conclude the answer on kinship terminologies. Needham was critical of one tendency among anthropologists. According to him, anthropologists felt that kinship is a universal phenomenon. Kinship is a universal phenomenon. See, somehow anthropology had been inflicted by this tendency of writing about universality of things like marriage, family. So that's how your syllabus is framed, definition and universality. But interestingly, for kinship, you don't find that in your syllabus. For kinship, he is not mentioning definition and universality. Maybe because the paper setter, the syllabus setter, was influenced by Needham. One of the very contemporary fellows, I mean, not anymore there, but a 20th century writer. For Needham, anthropologists from the beginning had been carrying certain tendencies, such as trying to find universal existence of social institutions, such as the familial institutions of marriage, family, and kinship. And for Needham, there was an unnecessary importance given to this particular social institution more than what is actually existing on the field. That kin group there, the tribal group there, for example, once again we are going back to Lorna Marshall's study of Kung Bushmen. For her, Kung Bushmen considered kinsmen very important, that if at all they are not sharing, they would be excommunicated. There is a possibility of they being the target of mockery, backbiting, etc., and gossip. And through all this discussion, she was trying to highlight that kinship is important. For Needham, maybe there is a misunderstanding of the whole thing. Maybe subsistence was the more important thing than the kin group alone. Kin group was actually used for the subsistence, not the vice versa. I hope you are following what I am saying. See, generally I avoid such kind of high sounding discussions in the class, because at least at this exam, such kind of very high academic discussions are not really required. But then one kind of a conclusion you might generate, I will tell you right now. Kinship terminologies have been changing across time, approaching a common variant due to sharing of common knowledge in the contemporary world. With certain common tendencies, such as avoiding parallel and cross cousin marriages, the same terms get to be used for them. For Needham, study of kinship terminologies in particular and kinship in general has been an area of special interest for anthropologists. Along with the other familial institutions, they attempted to find kinship as a universal social institution. This, according to him, led to the neglect of the other, possibly more significant social paradigms. His influence was pronounced in the post-1980 socio-cultural anthropological writings in both North America and in Europe. On the other hand, the Asian schools of anthropology still give a higher importance to the familial institutions, and try to explain social change with an analysis of how family, kinship, and marriage have been changing. That forms your answer. There is one other small topic which you would read from the social anthropology document that I shared with you, called unilineal descent groups, which we call lineage, clan, phratry, and moiety. That you would read from social anthropology material that we shared with you. So if that is the question, see, there are two different kinds of questions that might be asked here. One can be unilineal descent groups. If the question is unilineal descent groups, you define unilineal descent, and then you say that these are the different unilineal descent groups, that is lineage, clan, phratry, and moiety. Each one you pick up, write an example, give the possible types there, and the functional example. So it's something like this. So you are starting with defining what is a unilineal descent group, meaning either you are tracing descent or descent either through maternal side or paternal side alone. That is unilineality. Within that unilineality, there can be four different possibilities. It is not that all the four would be existing simultaneously in any culture group. There might be a possibility that there are only lineages and clans, and there are no phratries and moieties. And there is a possibility that there is a moiety, clan, and lineage, but there is no phratry. Okay, we have seen examples such as the Todas or Bhils, etc. There is a possibility that there is a moiety, but there is no existence of phratry. And then you can continue the discussion, such as within each of them there can be types. For example, there can be matrilineage, patrilineage. There can be matriclan, patriclan. There can be matri, phratry, patry, phratry. Similarly, in moiety also, there can be matrimoieties and patrimoieties. And for each of them, you would give examples. This is one kind of a question. Second question can be lineage and clan. This is a popular one. There can be a 10 marker, lineage and clan. So you say that these are unilineal descent group, meaning of the unilineal descent group, how lineage is defined, how clan is defined. One of the earliest definitions we had given in the class, how one is tracing the ancestry. So you are actually trying to write a difference between lineage and clan. And you say that how lineage is a small time group, whereas clan is a much deeper group where the individual is trying to trace the ancestry beyond, maybe possibly, the human individuals themselves. You're trying to trace your ancestry to an unknown, non-human, maybe possibly animistic, non-animistic individual. It may not be simply a biological ancestry you are tracing. It may be because some kind of a relation you try to establish with some non-human entity that makes him or her, that makes it your ancestor. So you can give certain examples, and you link the clan institution with totems. Totems are a clear correlated entities wherever there is a clan existing. With lineage, it is not really possible. But you say that all these are the ones which are exogamous groups. All of them are exogamous groups. When you are writing a full-fledged answer like unilineal descent groups, when you're talking about moiety and fratry, there you can incorporate that fratries are exogamous, but moiety can be an endogamous group. So we found two different types of examples, where there is a moiety exogamy, where there is moiety endogamy. So you can read that particular note, social anthropology. You can take this as your assignment to submit. You take the question, two questions rather. One is clan and lineage. The other is unilineal descent groups. Let us go to the next one in today's class. Make it a habit to read thoroughly the details that are given, and then from time to time what are the new additions that are given in the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. And I think that was the news. That ministry was the winner of Prime Minister's Award for Excellence in Public Administration 2018. Because of which some institution therein has to come as a potential question. So once this is the occasion, the potential organization that might occur in your exam is National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. That is one of the principal bodies there, and hence National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. Those of you who are writing the exam this year have to definitely prepare on this question, functions of National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. Unlike several other ministries, Ministry of Tribal Affairs had been changing, updating its stuff on a regular basis. In spite of being one of the earliest ministries, I think only after 1999 we could see the emergence of this one. So till then, as a department, it was existing in several other ministries. And finally, it got its own identity as a full-fledged ministry. And once the ministry came into establishment, there came a realization over a period of time on the special requirements of the community, such as scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. So after which the commission also got bifurcated, giving a special title of National Commission for Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes. So I want you to go through the basic things such as Article 338 and 338A. And this is readily available from your website, but I would be placing whatever important things from the ministry in one document and make it available to you. This you will have to go home and go through what are the functions of the constitution of the commission. And elsewhere he also talks about powers of the commission. Interestingly, like several other private bodies, these commissions are also coming up with their own brochures. The brochures are giving us the details that are very handy. Including things like, what are the constitutional provisions, what are the legal provisions, and the details of the programs they deal with, their functions, powers, etc. So the readily downloadable brochure also I would try to provide to you. You can actually go through. So the key lines there, if we can see: investigating, monitoring the safeguards provided to scheduled tribes, inquiring the complaints, participating in the advices, submitting the reports annually. These days, more or less, it has become an annual affair. Previously, it was there on the paper that annual reports have to be there. Whenever they remembered, they used to, but now it has become more or less a regular affair. Every year you are able to see, and that is for your own exam benefit. So you will have to, the annual report, current annual report is also available there. So discharging the functions to the president, etc. So ये आप घर पर देखिएगा, functions, etc. I am more keen, though I have said this before, because we are once again introducing the scheduled tribes. These are the major categories. And interestingly, the commission in its website is giving all those details: educational, cultural safeguards, social safeguards, economic. So if a question comes, constitutional safeguards for scheduled tribes, the key will be given to the examiner from the Tribal Affairs website only. So it looks good if you are able to take the same kind of a categorization. Previously, such a categorization we could see in a book, Indian Tribes Through Ages by R.C. Verma. And now the similar kind of categorization the website, ministry website uses. So it is your very typical Indian polity question. But what we expect from the student is, if the question is on constitutional safeguards for scheduled tribes, you start with a comment why a constitutional safeguard became necessary for them. Then you define what a scheduled tribe is, and then you say that these are the various things. Can I go, sir? No? You don't worry, I'll share that with you, but you make it a point that you memorize the list. What I liked in that document is he tried to write in a simple way the list of articles instead of elaborating into one full paragraph. Generally we do that. For every article we try to write a long paragraph. Instead of that, he is trying to give you the crux wherever possible. Educational rights, social rights. Those are the other safeguards. 275, where grants and aid have to be provided. 244, clause 1 and 2 for the 5th and 6th schedule. The political safeguards, reservations, etc. And ministries where they have to be constituted, scheduled tribe reservations, and the service provisions also. This is a very run-of-the-mill kind of information that you would do back home. Along with, there are some legislations given. A few of them we will be doing in details. Safeguards under various laws. Your syllabus especially mentions among the others, though the syllabus doesn't explicitly mention, I would want you to prepare on this. Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act, and amended based on 2015 whatsoever. So this anyway we will be doing, but this one in addition you should be doing it. Of course, in your general studies you might be doing most of them, like the child labor, bonded labor. whenever you are doing questions of this kind, in general I am telling you, because this might be of use to you elsewhere also, the general tendency of the student is to go to that particular legislation and try to list out things for which least amount of marks will be given. He is not expecting you to simply write down the things from that legislation alone. The primary duty for you will be to go to the details of which were all the commissions or committees that were appointed by the government from time to time. And occasionally what happens is, one committee in the whole list of the committees and commissions would become to be a torchbearer or would become a deciding one. And this committee or commission would change, must have changed the later events that had to happen. I hope you are following. In most of the cases we find that. Because in your general studies you have these topics such as the child labor as very imposing ones. Many times they were being asked in your exam. Legislations about child labor, etc. for big questions when you were being asked. The stream of the things have to be studied. Like especially if I am talking about the child labor thing, you have that Gurupada Swami committee. Once he came, the way people started to look at the problem changes. See, you can understand the government's intentions by the way they use the terms. Before that committee came, never did the government use the terms such as abolition or prohibition of child labor. Throughout there were something like minimum wages being given to the child laborers or Child Labor Protection Act. So you are taking that particular problem as given and acceptable. So within that acceptable situation, you are trying to actually come up with some kind of rules and regulations. So these are the timings, these are the number of hours that you should make them work, or this is the minimum wage, these are the health conditions, and such a way was the approach. But after the Gurupada Swami committee, government has clearly made a statement that we are going to prohibit. So after that we see prohibition in several areas. Prohibition in hazardous industries, prohibition in the shops, prohibition elsewhere. So you see an altogether different kind of approach government was taken up. I hope you are following what I'm saying. So in most of the cases we find this. So your answer must consist of the stream of things, the evolution of handling that particular problem. That would give you the marks with recent amendments whatsoever. ठीक है? Are you with me? Not happy? Not really happy? क्या सोच रहे हो? Deep into, if at all it is the depth in what I am speaking, then I take it positively. या फिर मुझे देख रहे हो, किसी और के बारे में सोच रहे हो? That generally happens. So you should start relishing the problems. Problems not of yourself, problems of the tribals. So we'll start with some of the very basic things here. You know what a tribe is. Ghuriye had said that earlier. Did we come across Ghuriye's definition of tribe? Yes or no? Gurtuleda. Em parle nashtamem ledu. When we were actually talking about tribe and caste continuum, then I tried to share some of the definitions with you. We'll see a recap of those definitions and then take you to the basic demography of tribes and what else to be studied. These are the very popular definitions. Andre Bettelly, where tribe was defined as a society. At that time you didn't know what society was, as if we know now. Tribe is a society having a clear linguistic cultural boundary with economically self-sufficient unit. These were the definitions we have already shared with you long time ago. But it's okay, I don't mind if you write down again as if you are writing it for the first time. We were actually trying to make a Guinness record in the LV Stadium, but we couldn't make it. Felt very bad about it. So I'm trying to update you on what was happening the last 3 days. Tribe is a close-knit kinship group that constitutes a society, all the more confusing. Very close kin group that constitutes a society. Can I go? There are a couple of others. Verma's definition: tribe is a homogeneous, self-contained unit without any hierarchical discrimination. This we have used many times. Tribe is an egalitarian society, a self-sufficient group. It is a homogeneous group. Tribe in itself, we consider it as a culture group, having a homogeneous culture. Can I go? And then we said actually, Gurye was giving those criteria, listing those criteria. Geographical isolation, racial affinity, those were some of the things we said. Last two were highly criticized, and number 4 also. When I was showing this definition, I told you about the parabolic evolution. In the neo-evolution, the parabolic evolution. Common dialect, animistic religion, simple occupation, carnivorous and naked or semi-naked. Tribe has many definitions. At the end of the day, we go with a feel that they are the simple people, they are homogeneous people, not so much into hierarchy, not so much into caste-like characteristics such as purity, pollution, not so much of stratification and centralization. But what we formally define is the scheduled tribes alone. The Constitution does not come up with a formal definition. It only says that based on so and so. Yeah. That's what is said about the definition of scheduled tribes. 342 provides for the specification of tribes or tribal communities or parts of or groups within tribes or tribal communities which are deemed to be, for the purposes of the Constitution, the scheduled tribes. You have defined, you haven't defined. What you have done is only that we are listing. The listing is provided based on this. There is a handicap. The handicap is the discipline itself is not clear about the definition. So instead of calling tribes, we are calling them scheduled tribes. Not all tribes are scheduled tribes. Only those tribes that are listed in that article are scheduled tribes. That is the reason why we see that in Andaman Nicobar Islands, we have one of the smallest numbers of scheduled tribes. In spite of having more than 90% of the population as the tribal population, a little over 8% alone are scheduled tribes. Can I go? So Article 342 provides us with an opportunity to specify which of the tribes or parts thereof can be called scheduled tribes. In the exam, you will not be able to write so much because there's a positive space there. Try to write an abridged one in 1-2 lines. Writing the entire constitution is not possible now in the exam. In a way, I felt it is good actually. But then, I want you to give 2 important lists of clauses. A committee called Lokur Committee that gave a definition of scheduled tribe. These are the criteria. I don't say definition. These are the criteria given by that committee to consider some as scheduled tribes. So there are certain indications of primitive traits. There's a distinctive culture, shyness of contact with the larger community, geographical isolation, backwardness of different kinds, maybe economic, maybe other forms of backwardness. So whenever you are trying to identify some, declare some as scheduled tribes, you try to weigh them against these clauses. Can I go, sir? Parallelly, you also try taking the characteristics of primitive tribal groups, then we will go into statistics, numbers, etc. PTGs, primitive tribal groups, now they are called particularly vulnerable tribal groups. Pre-agricultural level of technology, declining population, extremely low literacy, subsistence level of economy. These are the 4 clauses. At many places they should be internalized. You should not blink before dumping them on the paper. Questions occur like define PTGs, comment on their geographical location, what are the developmental and special schemes by the government. Everything said and done, certain things have to be memorized. 4-5 times you read, that will automatically come to you. మీరు వద్దన్నా వస్తుంది. Can I go? Very, very basic statistics. Let's have a look at this. Those symbols there, some regions are left out, etc. Don't bother about them, but overall picture is that 2001, the proportion of ST population in India was 8.2%. 2011 census, it grew to 8.6%. So right now, that is the percentage. So majorly, we are interested in anthropology in India about those 8.6% of population. Numbers are very, very important. So even if you don't like it, you write down the 1961 census, 2001 and 2011. The entire table may not be necessary, but 1961, 2001 and 2011. Though a very small increase, but it matters a lot. Also because occasionally we are defining certain tribes based on declining population. కొత్త టాపిక్, కొత్త బుక్. Let us see by the end of tribal anthropology to what extent you will be able to finish the book. Can I go, sir, ma'am? Let me go, please. So right now we are trying to deal with that 8.6%. These are for your typically preliminary exam questions. So red colored one, the dangerous line out there. Percentage of scheduled tribes less than 5%. This is percentage wise. We are not talking in terms of numbers. If you are considering numbers, you'll get some different picture. White colored ones there, Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, that is less than 5 or almost 0% scheduled tribes. Green on the eastern side of it, more than 40%. But then what is much more communicative is this particular one. State-wise distribution. So if we are seeing in the clockwise order from MP, you have 14.7%, Maharashtra 10%, Odisha 9%, etc., etc. We are having Meghalaya at 2.5%. So this is actually the population as a share of the national contribution. We are not speaking of the percentage of people as compared to their own population. So that 8.6% of population, ST population at the All India level, that is distributed as such. So most populous are the ones MP, Maharashtra, and then you have Odisha, etc., etc. This is for the basic statistical thing. You can use them for your general studies actually. I am more worried about something else here. This puts the mainstream to shame. How much ever we speak of increasing mortality or feticides or IMR, MMR, etc., in the tribal communities, this one number challenges our modernity. 940 in the overall population, whereas there you have 990 females per 1,000. Especially in the mainstream society, I am not simply worried about the modernity being questioned. It is also because maybe the difficulty of finding a proper mate. If the numbers further go down, you will have to compromise with polyandry. So you should see to it that the numbers, I'll take you somewhere else. Then you would start writing some note. Basically, we are dealing with that throughout our discussions. See, in 6.1 of paper 2, there are things like biogenetic elements or linguistic elements, economic elements. They were already covered at different points of time. We are approaching 6.2. So here what we will do is we'll just see what are all the problems that we will have to cover in the syllabus. Then I will take you to approaches to tribals, 3 popular approaches we have been talking about, like isolationism, assimilation and integration. We will be writing a short note on that. Then we will move on to the problem of tribal illiteracy. This is a very popular picture that gives you in a nutshell all those problems that UPSC wants you to study about. Poverty is at the center. It is the result of several things and it results in several other problems. So you take the picture, then we will start approaching each one of the problems. Generally, it is said that poverty of tribals is the result of several things, including extravagant expenditure, exploitation at the level of, it may be an individual exploitation or a cultural exploitation. When I say individual, moneylender is the powerful fellow. Cultural exploitation may be because of several things. It may be due to urbanization, industrialization, government officials, voluntary organizations, missionaries, several people who have a mission to exploit the tribal. And then, of course, forest policies have their own unique contribution of tribal exploitation. And when you are doing this, you make it a double arrow. And in fact, instead of a single arrow, all these culminate into bonded labor. LA stands for land alienation. Alienation. Indebtedness, land alienation, lack of education, health, housing, sanitation related problems, all of them resulting in bonded labor. And then that is also, on the other hand, is seen as a problem related to migration, psychological problems, frustration, highly frustrated, getting depopulated. So big questions are asked, forest policy, and the other questions are very repeatedly asked, education, health, land alienation, indebtedness. It is generally understood that culture contact is responsible for all those problems. Your syllabus actually does not mention culture contact anywhere, but that can be specially asked as a question, a short note on culture contact. So when a question such as culture contact is asked, religious contact, mainstream society establishing contacts, industrialization, globalization. When I say mainstream establishing a contact, this may not be simply a political contact, economic contacts. And when we say that, we will also incorporate that the government intervening, interfering. It is generally said in anthropology that all the problems of the tribals are due to culture contact. They were very happy when you were not in contact with them. It's like UPSC responsible for all the problems in your life. When you are not in contact with UPSC, You had a jolly good time. Sleepless nights, lack of food, lack of comfort, giving up everything in life. From otherwise a social being, you became, if not an antisocial, a non-social being. Political in the sense when you are bringing them into the fold of the modern political regime, like extension of the constitution, extension of the governing mechanisms, kind of. Now you started to tell them what is right and what is wrong as if they didn't know earlier. You are trying to impose your right and wrong on them. Government in terms of policies. Mention as what? Sir? You may mention it as one among several things, but you don't try to highlight that alone. I don't subscribe to that idea. Because I lived in the left-wing extremist areas when things were in a different way. I mean, current left-wing extremism might be different from what it used to be 20 years ago, 15 years ago, kind of. You may put it there, but actually speaking, that in itself can be asked as a separate question where you may get an opportunity of writing the evolution of it. So these are the offbeat kind of questions. How the left-wing extremism might have impacted in the Esther years and how in the contemporary times. At one point of time, they were the ones who were actually responsible for the machinery to work. And things have changed to such a level that the machinery stops working, or you are making the machinery to stop working, kind of. So in a way, you can write as one among them. Maybe you can use that in the cultural exploitation, apart from the missionaries and industrialization. Anything else? Can I go to the next one? So this is a general picture. See, it's a rarity that a question can be asked, a big question on, write an essay on tribal problems. Don't write. Because the entire second section of the second paper is about the tribal problems only. People have been writing books and books about them. You cannot write in about 300 words or 400. Don't select that question at all. But culture contact, though it is a very wide one, you can bring it down into some proper heads, and with couple of pictures you will be able to do some justice to that question. Also because, UPSC has to ask one question that you cannot touch or you must not have done earlier. And hence, that can be a possible question. But then, see, whenever a question on problems is asked, there's a traditional way of moving. You should know the magnitude of it. Unless otherwise you don't know the magnitude of it, you cannot think of who must have been responsible, what must have been responsible, or what you should do to address that magnitude. See, it's as simple as what you understand, what you define as poverty. I am sure, 3 or 4 classes in your economic class, you must have struggled to define poverty. And finally you said that there is no standard, and then there is this commission, Lakdawala said this, and then you would majorly wind up saying that, okay, there might be nutritional thing, and every day who is measuring the nutrition thing? How many calories you are eating, God knows. Quality and quantity matters. And finally you would say that, okay, maybe that annual earnings, how many rupees you are earning could be a thing, kind of. So quantifying is very important. So first you quantify, then you see the distribution. When I say that education is a lack of education is a problem, your syllabus writes as education in tribal problems. Maybe it's by mistake, instead of writing, they could say lack of education or illiteracy, kind of a thing. First of all, whether to be literate is necessary or not for a tribal, that has to be settled. So I think we have crossed the time where we should question whether literacy is required or not. Sometimes talking the language of your exploiter becomes necessary. That's how things were. When we had to fight the British, we learnt their language, we learnt their education, we learnt their way of thinking, and we used all the weapons given by them to drive them out. So I think tribes have reached that stage where it has become inevitable for them to learn our skills, learn our language, get our education, so that they can either harmoniously be with them or fight us. Harmoniously be with us or fight us. So first the magnitude and then the distribution. If I'm saying that education, lack of it is a problem, is a tribal problem, it is not a universal problem. There are certain places where we find the education of the tribals much higher qualitatively, quantitatively, much more superior than our own mainstream society. We see that there are certain states who have still to reach that 55, 50, 60 number, whereas you find that more than 90% being just there. Everything and every entity you touch, including the non-human life forms there, they are educated when compared to the rest of Indian society. So you should know the geographical distribution, the magnitude of it, the magnitude and the distribution of it. Thirdly, you would talk about, of course, not very specifically, but you should indicate what could be the responsible things there, who was responsible. Ultimately, you will blame the culture contact only. And then with some kind of ground level studies, you should be able to tell what are the governmental interventions. At some places NGOs experiments, at some places governments programs itself. Whether they could emerge as certain sparks so that other places can emulate them. And then in most of the answers, you would conclude on whether, if at all it is a question on tribal forest policies, you would say that enough damage has happened and now you are saying that you are going to give them the rights. After everything is looted, now you would want to give. Now you are planning to give, I appreciate, so thank you very much. That should be your concluding statement. So for every problem, you would have a conclusion based on whatever must have happened in the recent past. So we will start with the first problem there.
Ma'am, in depopulation, can we have biological reasons?
You can. Maybe biological reasons in the sense that maybe endogamy was there from the beginning also. And now you have added something else. Of course, we will see. There are certain case studies where we find that in certain populations we have about 32% of marriages being consanguineous. That could be the reason. But there are people who say that not everything is wrong because of this. Let's see. Biological from the other perspective, culture contact and that being responsible for the new diseases. We'll start with this very simple one, which requires good amount of numbers and flow charts also. Somebody, when they were talking about education in the regional medium, etc., I find it that regional medium education is slightly advantageous because you are not starting with your LKGs and UKGs, all kinds of KGs, you are not there in the regional medium. You straight away start with grade 1 and that actually saves time. Abhi to kya hai na, the moment the child is born, he is in the school. As if he is born to go to the school only. There are schools catering to the infant education also, as if the mothers have had the education of how to take care of the infant. Maybe that she is not able to take care of the infant, she is putting him there, and I found tremendous amount of learning in them, and the ease with which they carry into the next years, the future years. If not there, the parents, I think, would have struggled to teach all those things throughout the life also. They would not be able to teach them. Because the children are learning things at a such faster pace and at an age that we cannot actually imagine. And the socialization skills, see, in the absence of the kind of joint living or the kind of kinship being there to take care of things and groom the children, now more systematically, what are the kinds of animals you introduce to them or colors you introduce to them in the infancy, and then kind of. But if not this particular perspective, I think the regional mediums have this advantage of skipping certain grades in the early times, and you are actually able to reach to the higher classes at much an early age when compared to somebody in the colonial English medium. So feel happy if at all. So you can compare with your neighbor who must have studied in the convent. He must have finished his graduation at say about 23, 25 years. You have finished long time back in 18, 19 years only. See, there's a half a decade of difference there. So feel happy. In that half a decade of difference, he did not substantially learn much. Look at the last one. 2011 census. All India average was about 73% literacy rate, and their scheduled tribes, right now scheduled castes, I'm putting them aside. Scheduled tribes, for the first time, we see them crossing the 50% line. I'm so sorry for the last benchers, I can't do much about it. So you can see there, for the first time since independence, we have seen scheduled tribes crossing that 50% mark. It's not a simple, not a small success actually. And see the percentage increase, in the percentage points, if you observe from 2001 to 2011, the overall population was moving from 64 to 72, whereas in the case of scheduled tribes, there is almost a 10 percentage points increase. But look at the female side there. This is where things are not really, so they still have to cross that 50% margin. But if you are observing from where they have started, a meager 8% at 1961, so you can understand what it should have been in 1941 or 1951. Definitely about less than 5%. So from less than 5% of literacy rate to 58% is no small an increase. But it's only that maybe it could have been much better, or it can get better. It has to get better actually, that's the whole conclusion, it has to get better. This is taking an average. Many times averages do not communicate things. So if we say that, see, in the overall Indian population, 64% of the females are educated, it is no match to that 80%. So another dimension we will have to see is the gender gap. Here, if we are looking at the overall population, 80 and 64, you can look at the scheduled tribe population number 68 and 50. I think it is much more competitive there. Gender gap seems to be wide in both the cases. So when you are trying to work on scheduled tribe literacy rates, you should also be working on yourself when it comes to the gender gap. That's where several schemes and programs, they start coming up. So statistics are very, very important for your exam. You will have to somehow internalize, you'll have to somehow internalize the numbers. At least 2001 and 2011, they should be handy. Of course, in your general studies, you will be preparing for several questions, especially in your preliminary. I really love those number-based questions there, where there is no number given in the question, but the question is about the number. very popular questions. So 1991, where the overall Indian population crosses that 50% literacy mark. 1981, male literacy crosses that 50% mark. 2001, female population crosses the 90%, the 50% mark. And when it comes to scheduled tribes, the female is still waiting. Spent some time on the atlas maps on social indicators, literacy, sex ratios, maternal mortality rate, which region, and then IMR related maps. Especially those who get frightened with numbers. You will have to spend some time. I don't expect you to write the whole thing. You just remember right now 2001 and 2011. So midday food had really worked a lot across tribes and across rural areas, so that a child would want to go to the school, at least for the food. And several experiments are now being conducted with additional facilities. I remember a long time back, it was in sometime in 2003, 2004, I think. A person, a child who learned to live, I'll tell you this. So it was like there was one scheme. The family of the child labor, I mean somebody rescued from the child labor and admitted in the school. The family of the child laborer was getting some particular amount of food grain. That was the whole thing. So a friend of mine was working in some school. So these are all the government schools who were giving the accommodation and then kind of. So there was one boy who was constantly absent for the school in which my friend was working. He was there hardly for a week in the school. So we got a suspicion that maybe he was working still as a child laborer, and hence he was there only for a week. So a close observation, and then going into the details, we found that that little fellow was so smart, he got an admission into 4 schools. So from each school he was attending for a week. And from 4 different schools, he was getting whatever due he had to get. I mean, for 4 different channels, he was getting the food grains. So at such an young age, he was so smart in getting the benefits from 4 different places. I was really appreciative of him. So later, they cut down his name from the rest of the schools and put him in one. And there were several other things that had happened after that. And we'll talk about him at a later point of time. Just look at this. The highest and lowest literacies we boast of, AP. 49.2%. Whereas we have the other states, union territories, 91 and above percentages. That's what I was saying. On the one hand, we have the so-called tribal states outperforming incomparably when compared to the mainstream states. So today you find this as an opportunity. Go back home, look into the chart, maybe in census, maybe in your India annual, you look at the table, go close to it, see how the distribution of literacy rates are, which are the states or union territories that are having less than or more than the national average literacy rate. Interestingly, no union territory has less than the national average literacy rate. So you go back and see, look at the statistics gender-wise also. That is not my area of interest as of now. For the ST, sir. Now let us have a look at this. A conversation at home. I'll read out the right hand side one for the students who can't see from the back. In school, we were told that Hindus pray in a temple, Muslims in a mosque, and Christians go to church. And what about us? That actually shows that your books are not accommodating the tribal culture. In fact, there are a couple of books, anthropology through caricatures, anthropology through cartoons. Maybe once you finish your anthropology classes, then I will put you across them. Interestingly, even on thinkers, there are some kind of cartoons. So Levi Strauss talking to somebody else and somebody making fun kind of things. So those things can be better appreciated once you finish the whole lot of it. Basically, first of all, why tribes need education, that is one thing. Or if at all we are trying to give them education through different kind of a curriculum or different kind of a package altogether, why is it necessary for them? Primarily because these are the people who have a totally different social structure, their needs are different, and their understanding of the worldview is different, their ecosystem is different. So I think it is here those people who must have stayed among the tribes, you should be in a position to appreciate the whole thing in a much better way. We are not speaking of a group that is actually talking about the hike or reducing of the annual fee in the schools. We are talking about somebody who are not in a position to reach the school because school is at a distance that is so very far off. We are not talking about the uniforms, the annually changing uniforms in the schools. We are talking about the people who do not have proper clothing on a regular basis. And those of you who must have seen the residential schools and hostels, the tribal or scheduled caste residential schools, you have some kind of a fair idea what actually was happening there, thanks to some of the movements, some of the officers who are trying to do their bit. So basically it is the cultural differences, structural differences in the society that make us. Keep reading this would really help you. Why should there be different kind of education curriculum for them? Because they are not you. They do not have the kind of economic subsistence as the mainstream has. They may be foragers, they may be shifting cultivators, they may be migrant populations, nomads, or artisans. So you remember something we had seen some time back in this SSB documentary, Sardar Sarovar project, and some kind of schools we were speaking about. I think this is that kind of a curriculum, that kind of education is an answer to all these questions. So it's like, whenever we open our textbooks, we start with India is my country. They don't know where India is. And we speak of we speak of the Indian culture as an all-pervasive culture. The language that we speak. So that's what, there are certain major problems. One problem is the need of modern education. Second problem is the content, the curriculum that we teach, the language in which we teach, the kind of teachers that we have, the distance of the school, the placement of the school, and above all, the grading and the kind of holidays, the seasons that we have, the school seasons. See, this has always been a puzzle. Why should it be that in the summer there has to be a vacation? Many educationists had been arguing about it, at least in the rural setup, in the tribal setup. Whenever there is a harvest, there need to be a vacation. In the summer, there is no harvest. They need not have a holiday for that matter. But then we have the same old colonial tradition of summer vacation. For a white fellow, summer, it was necessary for him. He had to relax go around and relax. For a summer is not really required to be a vacation. That is the time, I think, where one can sit and study. What do you do in summer? You go out and play in the sun and get all the sunburns. Dispersed, not always accessible. I think for us, quantity is more important now rather than quality. At many places, quantity is important. Forget about full-fledged schools. We don't have a single teacher school. So, in some of the areas, they experimented with this. Zaza was writing in one of his essays. So in tomorrow's class, when we meet, we are going to refer to several of the essays that Zaza had written before that formal report had come. People only started to know him after that report was submitted and publicity was given to it. But much before that, he had written several books of anthropology. One of the writings was tribal health and a medical anthropological perspective. That was a very popular essay of him. So we are going to see some of those writings in tomorrow's class. So he was mentioning this. Like part-time teachers for these schools. You cannot ask them to be there permanently there. They will anyway be not there. As in the documentary in SSP, we have seen teachers never come, only on first or on flag hoisting day, they come and take the salary kind of things. It is not only teacher, any officer for that matter. Tribal postings are considered to be punishment postings. Kotulu Valasa, telusu kada, Kotulu Valasalo Prakash Raj posting avutadi. Kotulu Valasa is a place, no? Kotulu are monkeys. Valasa is a place where they live. So that is one of the hamlets where this officer gets posted, the policeman. You behave otherwise, you will be posted in Kotulu Valasa, which is a punishment posting for you. So everywhere that happens. So we will be continuing on this in your next class so that your friends also can assemble. We are going to see. And be patient to write several flow charts in tomorrow's class. Have a good time. You mind finishing your planner? At least those of you who are interested. We are at 66. Descent groups, then kinship terminology systems, and we started with definition of tribe. And right now we are approaching tribal problems.